Namaste everyone, and welcome to the Gita class with the Vedanta Society of Greater Houston. Glad to see everybody again and chant. Om Parthaya Pratibodhitam Bhagavata Narayanena Swayam Vyasena Gratitam Purana Munina Madhye Mahabharatam Advaitam Ritavarshinim Bhagavatim Ashtadashadhyayinim Ambatvam Anusandadhami Bhagavad Gita Bhavadveshinim Vasudeva Sutan Devam Kamsajanuramardanam Devaki Paramanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadgurum Mukam Karoti Vachalam Pangum Langhayate Girim Yatkripa Tamaham Vande Paramananda Madhavam. O Mother Bhagavad Gita, we meditate on you who were made known to Partha, Arjuna, by the Lord Narayana himself. You who were included in the Mahabharata by the ancient sage Vyasa. You, the goddess, who rains down the nectar of Advaita, non-dualism, in 18 chapters. You, the destroyer of relative existence. We worship Krishna, world teacher, the son of Vasudeva, the supreme delight of his mother Devaki, and the destroyer of the demons Kamsa and Chanura. We adore that supremely blissful Madhava, by whose grace the mute are made eloquent and the lame are enabled to cross over mountains. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat. Om peace, peace, peace be unto us all. So we will pick up where we left off last time. And last time we started on chapter 4. The chapter on the renunciation of action through knowledge, which means the renunciation of action through knowledge means not acting. It doesn't mean giving up action itself. It means through knowledge, knowing that I am not the doer and that mine is the right only to the work, that let the body and mind work, but to know that I am free from action and to give up the desire for the fruits of action. So we came last time up to verse 6. And so in what we've covered so far, Sri Krishna tells Arjuna in the beginning of the chapter that this yoga that I am teaching you, it was lost. That in ancient times, I taught it to the son, Vivaswan. The son taught it to his son, Manu, the great lawgiver of the age. And Manu gave it to his son, Ikshwaku, the first king in the lineage of the royal dynasty. And then it was passed on from teacher to disciple. But in the course of time, this yoga was lost. And so now I'm teaching it again to you. Because, O Arjuna, you are my friend, you are very dear to me, you are my devotee. And so I teach it to you. And then Arjuna asks, how is it that how am I to understand this, that you taught this in ancient times? Because you were born just some years ago, 35 years or so ago you were born. How is it that I am to understand that you taught it in ancient times to Vivaswan, the sun himself, the solar orb, as a deity? And so then Sri Krishna says that I have had many births, as have you, but I remember all of them, and you don't remember them, O Arjuna. So that's where we came to last time. And so as you remember, last time we talked a great deal about reincarnation, because that, as I said last week, this is the first time that reincarnation is clearly expounded. It's hinted at in the Vedas, but here you find in the Gita and in the Mahabharata the clear idea of reincarnation, the fully developed idea of reincarnation. And as I said last time, that doesn't mean that prior to the Gita people didn't believe in reincarnation. It just means that there are ideas which are passed down culturally which are so obvious that people don't really talk about them or discuss them, especially in pre-philosophical ages. But then a time comes when people began to think critically, analytically about the ideas that have come down through tradition of their culture, their civilization. And so we find here the clear enunciation of the doctrine of reincarnation that all of us have come again and again. So now Sri Krishna has said that I remember all of my past births. You also have had many past births, but you don't remember them. That leads us to verse 6, which says, Ajopi san hyavyayatma bhutanam ishwaropi san prakritim swamadhishtaya sambhavam yatma mayaya. So this verse 6 and 7, 6, 7, and 8, actually, 6, 7, and 8 are very famous verses in the Gita, because now he moves from the topic of reincarnation, which is the case for all of us, to the idea of incarnation, that is the incarnation of God, the God incarnate. So he says, Ajopi san, avyayatma, bhutanam ishwaropi san, even though I am unborn, Ajopi san, even though I am unborn, I have no birth. That is, as God, I, Krishna, have no birth. Avyayatma, I am the immutable self. Avyaya Atma, I am the immutable self. So though I have no birth, being the immutable self, the self which never changes, within which there's no change of state, no internal change, no change from outside either. Bhutanam Ishwaropi san, and even though I am the Lord of all beings, so though I am unborn, because I am the changeless self, and though I am the Lord of all beings, prakritim swam adhishtaya, taking a resort to my own prakriti, my own nature. Here, prakriti doesn't mean nature in, there are two senses this could be taken in English, and both of them are wrong, so I'll have to explain them. One is taking resort to my own nature means the nature of that which I am. No, his nature is divine, so it's not taking resort to his divine nature, that's who he is. And also the other way nature means in English is that external nature, that which is untouched by human beings. In English, nature usually refers to everything except human beings and things that have been manipulated by human beings. So nature is the external world, that part of the external world which is unmodified by human beings. So neither of these meanings of nature, neither my own nature as God or the nature, non-human nature, neither of these is meant here. Taking resort to my own nature means my own prakriti. That is the nature in the fundamental sense, which we don't really have in English. We have to explain it to get to the idea in English. That is, everything which is an object of consciousness is part of prakriti, is nature, prakriti being translated as nature. So it goes back to the Sankhya idea, The idea discovered in the Vedic times by the first philosopher, Kapila, and probably, as far as we know, the first philosopher of the world, the one who first began analytical thought, analyzing experience and not telling stories, but analyzing experience as it is, finding the principles behind experience. So here, one of the many discoveries, but the greatest discovery of Kapila was that there is a fundamental dichotomy in our experience. There's the light of experience, which illuminates all of my experience, and then there are the objects of experience. So I see the external world. I am the perceiver. I see the external world. So there's the subject and the object of experience. But I also perceive this physical body, which I take to be me, but I can see it as an object. I can feel it. I can see it, experience it as an object. So I'm the light which illuminates the body. I'm not the body itself. It's an object of my experience, just like the outer world. And I can experience my own mind. I can see the operations of my mind. I can see my thoughts. I can see my emotions. I can see my memories. And as through meditation, I become more and more master of the mind, I even begin to see that which is called the unconscious mind. That is, it's no longer unconscious when I see it, but I begin to see the seeds of my thoughts and so forth, the seeds of my experiences. And so I am the light which illuminates all of this. I'm not the body, I'm not the mind, I'm the light which illuminates both, because anything that I can see as an object is not me. So anything that is not conscious, pure consciousness itself, again, not consciousness as we use it in the West, but consciousness as the pure light which illuminates everything else. Everything but pure consciousness in that sense is nature, is Prakriti. So when Krishna says here, though I am birthless, immutable, and the Lord of creatures, yet resorting to my Prakriti, my nature, he means Prakriti in that sense, because God, is the Lord of Prakriti. That is the root of objectivity itself. So taking it, God is the subject of all subjects, the eye of all eyes. As the Hebrew Bible, the Torah says, I am that I am. Now, most rabbis will translate it in different ways from the way I interpret it, and that's okay. That's allowed in the Jewish tradition to find new ways of interpreting scripture, as long as it's not nonsensical, as long as it leads to a good end. And so the Vedantic way of translating that, or interpreting, I should say, that statement, I am that I am, is that I am the I am of all I ams. Each of us, the sense of my being is the sense of I am. And I say, you ask me, who are you? And I say, I am Swami Atmarupananda. And you ask more, and I say, well, I live in Houston. I'm a Hindu monk. I do this, that, and the other thing. I came from such and such a place. My parents were so and so. Vedanta says that all of that is not really who I am. Who I am is just the sense I am. That pure sense of being, that pure sense of existence. That's who I really am. Everything else is an upadhi, that is a Sanskrit word, upadhi, that is something which is adventitious, something which is I've identified myself with, but which is not essentially who I am. I am the sense I am. Everything else comes after that. Before every thought, before every perception, before every experience, there is the sense I am. And God is the cosmic I am, which means it is in the I am that I am united with God, because God is the I am of all I ams. And so here, Sri Krishna is saying that I take resort to my Prakriti. That is the seed of objectivity. I am, and I am is always a subjective experience. You can't see the I am as an object. The I am is subjective. It's the very root of subjectivity. It is subjectivity. and everything else is object. And so Prakriti is the root of objectivity. So he takes control of the very principle of objectivity, and then Sambhavami Atmamayaya. Then I embody myself forth through my own Maya, my inscrutable power of Maya. So the running translation is, though I am birthless, immutable, the immutable self, and the Lord of all creatures, yet resorting to my Prakriti, the root of objectivity, I come into being by my own inscrutable power, which is known as Maya. And so in Vedanta, Maya and Prakriti are two ways of speaking of the same thing. That Maya is that creative power within the self, which gives the root of objectivity, and out of that root of objectivity comes the universe itself. So we have the experience of I, the subject, and thou or it as the object. Thou when it's a person, and it when it's a non-person object. And so that root of objectivity. So Sri Krishna is saying that though I'm the Lord of all beings, that is, I am God, and I'm the immutable self, the I am itself, pure consciousness, pure awareness. That's who I am. And I am aja, I am unborn. I'm unborn, I'm the immutable self, I'm the Lord of all creatures, yet I take control of my own Prakriti, that seed of objectivity, which is Maya, and then I body myself forth through my own inscrutable power. That is, God takes birth in human form. There are two traditions in the world that accept the idea of the incarnation of God, and a third which almost accepts it. There's an important philosophical distinction, but it comes very close. So, of course, the two that accept the incarnation of God are Hinduism and Christianity. And the third, which comes close, is Buddhism. The difference with Buddhism is that they say the Buddha was a human being who became God-like. They don't use the term God because they don't accept the idea of a God of the universe, a unitary being who is the Lord of the universe. That Buddhists don't accept. But what do they say about the nature of the Buddha? They say that the Buddha, after attaining full enlightenment, the Buddha knows everything. The Buddha is identified with everything. The Buddha is omnipresent, omniscient, etc., and practically omnipotent. And so the Buddha becomes godlike. So the main distinction is that in Christianity and in Hinduism, there is God, and God consciously and deliberately takes birth in human form. And in Buddhism, human beings who are, again, God is out of the picture, human beings attain to a state of enlightenment which is always there, which is always potentially within everyone, within every being, within plants, animals, insects, every living sentient being. The potential for Buddhahood is there. So that means that Buddhahood is within everyone. The Buddha attains to that state and becomes, as it were, godlike. They take out the idea of creation. Their Buddhists are not interested in creation, the source of the world. They say that that comes out of our ignorance. But other than that, the Buddha is like in every other respect, like an incarnation of God. And the Buddha can even after that, can even take on human form in order to help other living beings. So here we get the idea of the incarnation of God. An earlier expression of that was found in the Ramayana, the two great epics of Hinduism, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. The Ramayana is older, and the story of Rama is older than the story of Krishna. And so there also you have the idea of the incarnation of God as Rama. But there Rama is more in the Valmiki Ramayana, the original Ramayana. He's recognized as an incarnation of God, but he is more an incarnation of the principle of dharma. That is, Rama is the ideal man. He's the ideal son. He's the ideal brother. He's the ideal king, etc. He sets the human ideals. He and his wife Sita, they set the human ideals for human society. And as such, they had the most profound influence over Indian civilization. Because they, at that very early time in Indian civilization, still within the Vedic period, they presented the human ideals of human behavior. What is moral behavior? What is good behavior? What is proper behavior? How should people relate to each other? And of course, the Ramayana is filled with weak characters also, like the father of Rama. He is a king who has weaknesses of character. Kaikeyi, of course, she is a weak character. There are other weak characters in the Ramayana, but it presents, in contrast to them, what the ideal is. But it's in the life of Krishna, as first told in the Mahabharata and the Vishnu Purana, that we get the idea of the full incarnation of God. And then later, Rama's life was reinterpreted because he was seen as a full incarnation of God also. And so his life, the spiritual aspects of his life were brought out more. The Valmiki Ramayana is a wonderful text, a beautiful poetic rendition of the life of Rama. But later Ramayanas, they brought out the spiritual side more. And Valmiki brings out the side of dharma, what is proper behavior, the ideals of behavior. So here we get, again, in the Gita, we get this clear statement of incarnation. In the Vedas, the incarnation of God is not recognized. It's not that they were against the incarnation of God, it's just that the idea had not yet developed in the Vedic period. Of course, again, as I've said many times, the Gita comes from the Vedic period, but it is written down after the end of the Vedic period. And so the story comes from within the late Vedic period, but the text itself is written afterwards, and so it's not included in the Vedas. The Mahabharata, of course, is not a part of the Vedas. It's considered a text which came soon after the Vedas, telling a story from the Vedic period. And so here we get, again, the idea of the incarnation. Obvious differences between the Christian and the Hindu view of incarnation. One distinction is that in Christianity, Christ is the unique and only incarnation of God, whereas Hinduism says that God has incarnated again and again through time. There is what I consider, I should say that is my opinion, but I could back it up with the Hindu tradition. It's a degeneration of this idea of the incarnation of God that we find in modern times in Hinduism, where every teacher who wants to be a successful teacher practically is regarded as an incarnation of God. And so even in the time of Swami Vivekananda, he came back from Dhaka and he told Sharat Chandra Chakravarti that I went to Dhaka, and in Dhaka itself right now there are 50 incarnations of God. And meaning that everybody who wants to be a successful teacher first has to say that I'm an incarnation of God. And so right now you find in that 2020, you find many incarnations of God walking around. So no, the idea is, as we'll see in the coming verse, in the next verse, that it's from time to time that I incarnate. And Swami Vivekananda said that it's interesting that about every 500 years, you see a tremendous manifestation of spiritual power. So that 500 years before Christ, there was Buddha. We don't know how many years before that Rama and Krishna came. There are, of course, traditional ideas, but nothing we can date with surety. So the Buddha came 500 years later. There was Christ. A little more than 500 years after that were both Muhammad and then Shankara. Neither of them are considered incarnations of God. Their own people don't consider them incarnations of God. There was a manifestation of spiritual power. A new religious tradition was born out of the coming of Muhammad. And though he didn't consider himself, and the Muslims don't accept the idea of the incarnation of God, there was a spiritual awakening at that time. And then there was Shankara in India, and he also is not generally regarded as an incarnation of God, but as a great acharya, a great teacher, a special teacher, not just an ordinary teacher, but again, not an incarnation of God. Then there was, let's see, then there was the coming of Sri Chaitanya. And then about 400 years later, there was the coming of Sri Ramakrishna. And so, again, not mathematically, you count 500 and then you get another one, and then you count another 500 years and you get another, but roughly in that every millennium you get a couple of these manifestations of spiritual power. So from time to time, God incarnates. So one difference is that Christianity says Christ is the only incarnation, and Hinduism says that no, this has happened again and again. Something that has happened once, the Hindus believe, anything that happens once happens again. There's the idea in the Vedas itself of the unique and the universal, that everything is both unique and universal. Every snowflake is unique from every other snowflake, and yet they are all recognized as snowflakes. They are universal as snowflakes. They're unique in their particularities. Every time God incarnates, the incarnation is unique. Every one is unique. And yet the process of incarnation of God is universal. It happens again and again from age to age. Every human being is unique. Think of that, of the billions of human beings alive today and the many more billions that have lived through human history and even before human history, from the first human, each one has been unique, unlike every other. And yet we recognize all as people. And so there's the unique and the universal. So again, Christianity, the reason why is it that Christians insist that God incarnated only once as Jesus? It's not because they're trying to be obstinate or anything. It's because in their story, the story they have of Adam and Eve and the fall of Adam and sin entering into the world because Adam sinned, and then it was necessary for God to come in human form and sacrifice himself in human form so that people who accepted the sacrifice of Christ for their sake would attain to salvation. There's no place in the story for another incarnation of God. Christ is the unique and only incarnation of God because that tells their whole story. Anybody else coming on stage is going to spoil the story. And so Christ is unique. So again, it's not that they're trying to be obstinate or something. It's that in their story, there's no place for another incarnation. But in Hinduism, which is more based on, it's based more on principle rather than on personality and on story. It's believed that anything that has happened once will happen again. Each occurrence may be unique in its occurrence, but the principle of it happening is universal. Another difference is that in Christianity, God is both God and human being, or as they say it in the traditional formulation, is both God and man. Christ alone is both God and man, God and human being. We are creatures in Christian thought. We're not God, and we can never be God. So Christ was a bridge between God and humanity. And so it's that bridge between God and humanity which allows us to be saved in the Christian view. The Hindu view is quite different. Each one of us is God, just as Krishna was God, just as Rama was God, just as Jesus was God, just as Sri Ramakrishna was God. Each one of us is God, full God. It's just that the incarnation comes without karma. The incarnation comes from a state of knowing that I am God and decides to be born to help other living beings. We don't decide that I want to be born to help people. We just find ourselves one day born. There we are, here we are. And we're so surprised that we cry about it when we're born. And so nobody asks us, would you like to be born? We're just born. And that's because of our past karma. But God has no past karma. God takes birth freely out of compassion for other beings or for beings, because God is not a being, God is being itself. So God shows us what we are. God in human form shows us that we too are God in human form, and we can retain to our godhood. So these are distinctions between the idea of the incarnation, between Christianity and Hinduism. And again, as I already explained about Buddhism, the main distinction is that they take Buddha to have been a human being with a past history, many lives, just like us, but through great effort over many lifetimes, he attained to the state of Buddhahood, which is potential within all of us. And so in Tibetan Buddhism, they speak about the fast path to enlightenment. Don't get excited, because the fast path is difficult enough so that, again, we have to slow down, and it takes a long, long time to do it. So it's not so fast as it sounds. But they say that the fast path is a beautiful idea. They say that the fast path is to know that all forms, everything that we see, all forms that we perceive are empty. That every sound is mantra. Every sound that we hear is mantra. That is, every sound is rooted in reality. Every sound that we hear, no matter what it is mantra that can take us back to the ultimate reality. And every being is a Buddha. Every being is a Buddha. To see Buddha in every being, to see every being as a Buddha, as an enlightened being. And so that you find developed in the Tibetan tradition, and also in the Zen or Chan tradition of China and Japan and Korea, that every being is to be seen as a Buddha, just as we teach that we should see every being as God. Again, the Buddhist idea of the incarnation of God, they won't use those terms, neither God nor incarnation of it. But the idea is that Buddhahood is a universal state which all of us contain. It's just we have to realize it. So it comes out effectively similar, parallel to the idea of the incarnation of God. So I'll read the translation and then go straight to the next verse. Though I am birthless, the immutable self, and the Lord of all creatures, yet resorting to my prakriti, the principle of objectivity, I come into being through my own inscrutable power, my own Maya. Then verse 7 is particularly famous. It says, Yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavati bharata abhyuttanam adharmasya taratmanam srujamyaham. So yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavati bharata. O Bharata, that is, O Arjuna. O Arjuna, whenever, yada yada, whenever there is the eclipse of dharma, that is, when in the world, when in society, dharma goes down, dharma degrades. That is as I've explained before, dharma doesn't just mean righteousness. Righteousness in English has a very stiff connotation, that someone who's righteous means they're upright, but in sort of a almost judgmental sense. It doesn't need to be that way, but that's sort of the connotation that righteousness has attained. Somebody who is righteous and conscious of the fact that I am righteous. And that's why we speak about so-and-so is so self-righteous. He thinks that he's so self-righteous. But dharma means one who is in tune with the true nature of things and how that truth should be expressed in human life. That is, aware of the proper relationship between oneself and everything else and other beings, and acts in accordance with that truth expressed in human society. So whenever that dharma, that principle of spirituality, the principle of religion, and the principle of morality, all of that is included within dharma. When that begins to decline, abhutanam adharmasya, and there's the rise of adharma, unrighteousness, lack of spirituality, irreligiousness. That is, when irreligion becomes aggressive, when religion declines and irreligion becomes aggressive. Now that doesn't mean that just people stop going to churches and temples and synagogues, etc. It means that even churches, temples, and synagogues begin to become seats of irreligion. That is, people forget what it's all about. They forget the real purpose of their spiritual traditions, that it was to take us towards God. They were meant for the transformation of human nature. And that connection between the spiritual and religious observance was maintained in times of dharma. But that connection is lost at times of adharma, of unrighteousness. So that people forget why they do the things they do, and they become devoted to the forms rather than to the spirit of the forms. They become devoted to the letter of the law rather than what the law was supposed to express. They become fanatical about the wording of the texts, and they become fanatical about allegiance to a personality rather than what the personality taught, and so forth. That also is adharma. So adharma doesn't mean just people stop going to church and to synagogue and to temple. It means that even those places lose their sense of spirituality, and religion becomes a sense of ethnic identity, a sense of national identity, a sense of who I am as opposed to who those other people are who don't believe my religion, and I'm right and they are wrong, etc. So whenever there is the degeneration of dharma and the rise of adharma, tadatmanam srajamyaham, then I body myself forth. That is, I take birth. I body myself forth. Now let me say here that, and this is a controversial idea, but Swami Vivekananda in 1899, when he was on a ship going through the Mediterranean on his way to Europe for the second time, his second trip in 1899, he was asleep in his cabin, and he had a dream in which a sage, an elderly sage with a long flowing white beard, came to him and said, you are now in Crete, the island of Crete. And here was the birth of Christianity. And he explained to him that Christ had never, that there had been, that the story of Christ in the Bible, that was composed. It was not a record of the life of someone named Jesus, but it was something which was composed. After that, Swamiji, when he woke up, just after the dream, he woke up and was struck with wonder at the sense of reality of the dream. So he went up on deck and asked a deckhand who was there on the deck, where are we? And the deckhand said, we're just 20 miles off the coast of Crete. And so that also lent power to what Swamiji had experienced. So because it was a dream, and because he had no way, the man also told him that if you dig here, and showed him a spot on the island of Crete, if you dig here, you will find the evidence buried of the origin of Christianity. And so Swamiji never actually landed on the island of Crete, so he never actually saw the actual spot. And of course, he didn't dig up anything, not even having been there. So he never took this as proof. He never told people that Jesus didn't exist because I had a dream. No, he knew it was a dream. And dreams can be true, they can be revelations, or the mind can fool us also. But he used to say that he always had the doubt after that about the historicity of Christ. But he says in a beautiful lecture on Christ, the messenger, given in California after that experience, one of his most beautiful lectures on Christ, he says, it doesn't matter how much of the story of Christ is true. It doesn't matter whether there was a person named Jesus who actually lived the life as described in the Bible. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. But if in time it's proven that he didn't exist, that doesn't matter. Because the real Jesus is the manifestation of spiritual power that took place at that time, and which was the origin of Christianity. You can't get a tradition like Christianity out of nothing. I can proclaim myself a prophet, or I can make up a story like the Star Wars. You can make up the story of Star Wars, and it's a beautiful story and all of that, and many people love it. And there are people who go to conventions, Star Wars conventions. There are people who learn Klingon and other things like that. They dress up like characters in Star Wars and play act and all of that. But you don't get a living tradition which inspires people for 2,000 years and which produces a great number of saintly men and women. And all of the art, all of the music, all of the civilization which came out of that. So Swamiji says, whether there was the person we know as Jesus, as described in the Bible, or not, there was the manifestation which we know as Jesus, which we call Jesus, which took place at that time in what now is Israel. It took place at that time, and that is the real Jesus. And the fact that saints have seen Jesus in high spiritual states of ecstasy, that is proof of that there is this one that we call Jesus, who was the center of this power which manifested. So whether it was, so all of this is to say that yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavati bharata, and then taratmanam sarjamyam, then I body myself forth. Sri Krishna says, when there is the collapse of dharma and the rise of adharma, I body myself forth. That can be in human form, or it can be, if what Swamiji experienced in dream is true, then it was not even through the personal history of the man that is known as Jesus in the Gospels, but that there was a power, that a divine power which manifested in the hearts of people at that time, which was the source of the Christian civilization. So whenever, O descendant of Bharata, whenever, O Arjuna, righteousness declines and unrighteousness prevails, I manifest myself. I manifest myself. So it doesn't say actually I take birth in human form. That's understood to be the usual way, but it is I manifest myself. So God takes human form, or perhaps sometimes God manifests in another way that begins a spiritual tradition. And then we come to verse 8, which says, Paritranaya sadhunam vinashaya cha dushkritam dharma samsthapanarthaya sambhavami yuge yuge. So this verse 7, which I did a minute ago, and now this verse 8, which I just did, these are two extremely famous verses in the Gita. These two verses are the most famous verses from chapter 4. And so this says, Paritranaya sadhunam, for the salvation of the good. And good here doesn't mean the goody-goody, those people who pretend to be good or whatever. Here, the good means those who are spiritual, for the salvation of the deeply good. Swami Vivekananda taught that character is spirituality. So even a person who becomes deeply moral, not goody-goody again, not somebody who's afraid to say the word damn or hell or something like that, but someone who is deeply good. That is, deeply committed to the welfare of others, deeply committed to being unselfish, deeply committed to compassion and empathy with others. Such a person has deep character, which itself begins to manifest as spirituality. And therefore, you see through history many great people, like, just as one example of many, a person like Abraham Lincoln. He wasn't a person who was religious in a traditional sense. He wasn't a big churchgoer. He wasn't a person who wore religion on his sleeve. He wasn't a person who carried a Bible around in his arm to show everybody that he was religious. He wasn't somebody who wore a cross around his neck so everybody would think, oh, you're such a good religious person. No, outwardly he wasn't religious. But because he was a deeply good man, you find in his life, especially by the time he became president, you find deeply spiritual qualities manifested in him. If you read the stories about his life, for the people who know him, you see the signs of spirituality manifesting in him. So he was deeply good. So paritranaya sadhunam, paritranaya, for the salvation, not salvation in the Christian sense, that because you've accepted Christ, we save you, but for the liberation, would be a better term, for the liberation of the sadhus. Sadhus here, of course, doesn't mean monks. It means those, a sadhu is one who is deeply good. So it has gained the sense of a person who is spiritual, because people who are deeply good start becoming spiritual just by their deep goodness. And again, there are many examples through history of that. And so for the liberation of the good, the deeply good, which includes the spiritual, vinashaya cha dushkritam, and for the destruction of the evildoers. Now that's a hard statement, the destruction of those who do evil. The emphasis here from everything Krishna says in the Gita is not destroying people. It's not destroying people who do bad things. It's the destruction of the causes of evil doing. So I come, I God, I Sri Krishna, come again and again in different forms and under different names, and even in different countries, different cultures. I come again and again for the liberation of the deeply good and for the destruction of evil. Again, it's the destruction of evil, because in Vedanta and in Hinduism in general, no one is ever destroyed. We may die, we will die, all of us will die. As it's truly said, the one thing that can be predicted about everybody born into this world is that they're going to die. You may not know anything else about them, but you know that they're going to die. That's a safe prediction that is never contradicted. So everyone is going to die, but no one is destroyed, because the body dies, but we continue until we attain to liberation. And so even those who are so-called evildoers, I don't like that word, but that's what dushkritam means, evildoers, even they will come back again and again until they begin to understand the way to rise and to manifest their divinity and to really reach a state of blessedness. Even the worst of people will attain to blessedness one day. They have to pay for the things that they have done through the process of karma and rebirth, but eventually they too will find out that no, that's not the way to find happiness. And they begin to rise, they become spiritual and attain to a state of blessedness. And so the destruction of evildoers, again, doesn't mean in the sense in some religions, that the person is sent to hell to suffer eternally. No, there's no such thing as eternal suffering. There is suffering, of course, we all suffer. And if we do very bad things, then we may have to suffer a lot and for a long time. But the suffering is commensurate with what we've done. And nobody does infinite evil actions. We do, all of our actions are limited in nature. And so the results of our actions are limited in nature, meaning that they're limited in time. So whenever there is the decline of, oh no, I'm sorry, that's the previous verse, for the liberation of the deeply good, for the destruction of the evildoers, and for dharma samstapanarthaya, and for the establishment of dharma, sambhavami yuge yuge, I come back from age to age. So again, I don't come back 50 times at the same time as the many incarnations of God we have right now, but I come back from age to age. So this is something which happens over long periods of human history. Over a matter of centuries, again, God takes birth for the salvation of the good, the liberation of the good, and for the destruction of evil, and for the re-establishment of dharma, that is the rebalancing of dharma in society. So there's the idea that in the world, there's always some sort of balance maintained. At any cross-section of time, there's some sort of balance between good and evil, but sometimes the good in society, sometimes there are golden periods in society when things are going much better, and there are many more people who are deeply religious and spiritual, and other times when they are few and irreligion is more manifest. So there's also the balance over time. Over time, there's a balance. If you could take a cross-section of the timeline, you find sometimes things in society are better, sometimes they're worse, they get better, they get worse, golden periods, and then periods of degeneration. And so God comes from age to age to bring that sort of balance back, and to give an impulse to society, so to civilization. And so this is considered to be, in the Hindu tradition, a principle of a cosmic principle, that we talk about it as God deciding that, okay, I'm going to take birth now. But it's not so much that God is sitting there thinking about it, looking and saying, well, things are getting pretty bad, I think I better go now. No, it's not. That's anthropomorphism. That's taking things in a human sense. It's that the circumstances in the universe bring forth the incarnation of God, because everything is part of a unity. Here, there's diversity, but this diversity is founded in a unity, the unity of God, which we are one with, though we've forgotten it. And so it's that underlying transcendent unity, which brings about this, which keeps society from plunging into complete darkness. So when things get to a state of decline, then again, God manifests as a cosmic principle, as a cosmic necessity. And then things rise, and then things again go down. Why do they go down? Why don't things just stay up? Because that's the nature of time. That's the nature of entropy. That's the nature of everything in this universe, that everything begins to decay. And we also begin, from the time we're born, we're beginning to decay. But there's the life force which causes constant regeneration of our bodies. And so when we're young, we regenerate really quickly. It's not that the baby is not decaying. Yes, the baby is decaying, but the life force is stronger in the baby than the process of decay. And so the baby grows and manifests more and more, and learns more and more. It seems so vibrant and so full of energy and action. But then in time, the opposite, the power of decay begins to become stronger than the force of life within us. And then we begin our long decline into old age and finally death. And so that's a natural process that happens to everything. It happens to mountains, it happens to rocks, it happens to oceans, it happens to planets, it happens to solar systems, it happens to galaxies. It happens to everything. Birth, growth, manifestation. When the initial impulse is stronger than the process of decay, and then when that begins to expend itself, then again there is the process of decay becomes stronger, and there's the collapse. So it's part of that universal process that brings God back from age to age. So for the protection of the righteous and the destruction of the wicked, and for the establishment of religion, I come into being from age to age. So here we'll stop and take up verse 9 next week. We will take up verse 9.